This show is intended for mature audiences only. Viewer discretion is advised.
Hello, humans, and welcome to another episode of Gen X Gamer. That's right, the video game show that is not hosted by an annoying e-beggar. There are no Patreons, no Super Chats. That's right, we just talk about the games we love and how fun it is to hoard them, and maybe a topic here or there. Now, with that said, let's get ready for the show. On today's episode... Hello, humans, and welcome to another episode of Behind the Channel, but today it's a very special episode, guys. We're going to talk about Generation X music. There's a time period that a lot of us remember, a lot of us in Generation X remember, but a lot of you out there really don't even know happened. When I was growing up, there was two jobs that you wanted as a kid or a teenager. One of them was working at the arcade. The second was working at a record store. My next guest had that dream job. He's got so many stories and he knows so much about music. So I welcome the Ramblin Man. Sir, how are you?
I am very well. Yourself?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great now that I'm talking to you. I really love talking about music, you know, in this day and age when people don't talk anymore. Everybody just fights, right?
Yeah.
The more they fight, the more clicks they get. So it's all about the drama, but I want to talk about something positive, something that really was meaningful in a lot of people's lives, but we seldom hear about anymore, you know, and that is music. You know, before you worked at a record store, let's start at the beginning. What are your first memories of listening to music as a kid?
Oh, wow. Well, my household was very musical in terms of listening, and even I didn't pick up any of this talent, unfortunately, but my brother's got musical talent. My dad had musical talent. He played brass, trombone, trumpet.
Wow.
My brother is an absolutely amazing drummer. I don't know why he didn't take it forward. He's a millionaire, so he hasn't done too badly out of his life. So we'll forgive him that. But yeah, we always had music. It was just one of those households where I think the record player was on more than the TV.
Yeah.
So my mum was really into Motown.
Okay.
Soul. She loved the Supremes, Stevie Wonder, all that kind of jazz. My brother was into prog rock, so he liked things like Yes, Genesis, Pink Floyd. My dad was a trumpet and a trombone player, so anything brass. Yeah, anything brass. So he loved jazz. He loved Herb Albert, all that kind of stuff. Mariachi bands, anything with brass in it, he'd listen to. He loved the brass. So it was quite a weird mixture of things, really. And then obviously the period I was born in was quite a revolution in music. So I kind of kicked back even though I love all that sort of stuff now, I kind of kicked back from it then because I didn't want to be like my parents and my brother.
Yes.
Really.
Yeah. My mom used to listen to country music records in order to practice her English. That's how she was practicing her English.
Yeah.
But let me ask you, so what was the first music device that you ever had? Was it a record player? Was it a radio? What was the first one that was actually yours?
Me, myself, personally, it would have been a radio, yeah. We had a big sort of stereogram thing, a huge thing in the living room. When it was a piece of furniture in those days. It was wood and, you know, it's massive. But it sounded so great. I mean, it was just so deep and bassy and vibrant. My brother, we weren't the richest of family. We weren't poor. I'm not gonna try and say we were poor, but we weren't particularly rich. So we shared a bedroom, really, I think, throughout my whole childhood. Maybe before I can remember, I had my own room when I was very tiny. And he had a stereo system, and he was always upgrading it. He was great with electronics. He was great with electric, so he was always upgrading it. But mine was a radio. I was addicted to the radio. So yeah.
Yeah, me too. My grandmother, when we moved back to the States, because you know I was born in the States, but I was raised abroad, and when I came back, I was actually depressed. You know, because you move from environment.
Yeah, of course.
But my grandma bought me a small transistor radio, and I mean it was tiny. It was the one, and kids, you won't remember this. It just had like a little white a little white wire with one earphone that you could put
Oh,
on.
yeah.
That was it.
Stereo was the future right there.
I had, and that to me was the greatest gift I could have at that moment.
Yeah, for me, it was all about Sundays at 4:00. It was like the top 40 show.
Yeah.
And that was it for me. I was in heaven, so I would be up there in my bed with my one earphone in, as you said. Yeah. And I was addicted to it. And as soon as I got a cassette player later on, then obviously I was just taping stuff like mad from the radio.
Yeah, my mom, I asked her for a cassette player. Right?
Yeah.
And she didn't know. And, she just bought whatever was on sale. So she worked at a department store and she found this great deal. So she bought me this cassette player.
Yeah.
But the cassette player was an 8-track.
I was just going to say, I personally missed out on the whole 8-track thing. So I've never owned one. My dad had one, which I don't think he really got on with. He was a vinyl man, right? And that stuck with me over the years because I was very much a vinyl man, even when compact discs and goodness knows what else, mini discs came out. Even though I was there, I was part of that revolution. I was selling the things. You can't beat the sound of vinyl, unfortunately.
Yeah, no. And probably the only lucky break that I got is that this is a time where, 8-tracks were dying, I mean, so they were really cheap. So my first 8-track was AC/DC's Highway to Hell.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I mean,
what a way to kick off.
Yeah. Now, let me ask you, what is the first album that you first bought?
The first album the first album I remember buying. Now, I'm not saying it's the first one I bought, but the first one I remember buying was Electric Warrior by T-Rex, Mark Bolan.
Ah, okay.
Which has got like Get It On, Jeepster.
Yeah.
The reason why I got that was no kind of really. I mean, I loved the music, but Mark Bolan had his own TV show in the UK.
Oh, really?
Yeah, kids TV program.
Wow.
Yeah, and he used to have live bands on. It was amazing. It was an amazing time to be alive. So yeah, you'd have a lot of bands on there. He would play live. It was great. And I love Mark Bolan. I thought he was great. He was just different. I mean, he was different. I didn't know why then he looked different or he was acting differently. I just thought, man, this guy is, he's out there, right?
Yeah.
And so I went along. We used to have, I don't know the equivalent that you might have had over there, but like book tokens that you get gifts for at Christmas. I don't know if you get book tokens.
Yes.
Yeah. So we had what we called record vouchers. Okay. Mm-hmm. And it was a total monopoly, these vouchers, and they were owned by EMI Records. Right? You went into a store, you said, give me a £10 voucher, and you gifted it for somebody at Christmas. You got the voucher, you went off and you spent it. So I got a voucher. I can't remember how much it was for. It's probably a couple of quid, and that was enough in those days. And I went along, and there it was. It had a couple of my favorite songs on it. It was a no-brainer for me straight away.
Awesome. Now, let's get to the dream job. Let me tell you, here in the U.S., everybody wanted to work at the record store, but you actually had to know somebody in order to work at the record store.
Yeah.
And the people that worked at the record store, for us as little kids, right? So I'm talking that, we were like 12 years old, 13 years old.
Yeah.
And we would just go there and hang out and just try to be in their presence to see if we could just absorb some of that music knowledge, right? Yeah. We'd go to the comic book shop, we'd go to the arcade, and then we hung out at the record store. How did you end up working at a record store?
Well, that just sounds like my childhood. I mean, I was across the Atlantic, but I was either in an arcade or I was in a record shop, one of the two.
Mm-hmm.
And I just got the job from hanging out. I just literally got it from hanging out.
Oh, wow.
It was just before my 15th birthday. I'd be going into this same record shop all the whole year. I used to bug the hell out of them. Every time I used to go in, it'd be, I know that's not even out yet. How have they got this, right?
Yeah.
Oh, can I buy a copy of this or blah blah? No, and I thought I was getting on their nerves for a long period of time, and then the owner just one day just said, what do you do on Saturdays apart from being in here? And I said, I don't do anything on Saturdays apart from being in here, or I'm at the arcade, or I'm having a burger, and I come back here. He said, well, you might as well earn some money from it. Do you want to come and work here on a Saturday? But you'd only be like doing what we don't want to do and making the tea and stuff like that. And I said, yeah. I said, when can I start? He said, do you want to start now? I said, yeah. And it was as easy as that.
Wow.
And that was it. And then I spent the next 25 years in music retailing. Yeah.
Oh man, that is awesome. Let me tell you, I wanted that job. I never got it. I ended up working as a baker. I was making cookies and selling shoes. But I remember, one time I was like just up to my nose in flour and sugar and shit. And I asked my boss, what is the benefit? What are the benefits? What are the perks of working here? And he looked at me and he goes, hey, Frosty the Snowman, we don't drug test. How about that?
Yeah.
But what were the best perks when you were younger, right? When you were first starting, what were the best perks of working there in that record store?
Initially, really, it was just, you felt like you were part of the business, you felt like you were there, and just to open a box of new releases, just to touch, feel, hear. Initially, as a 15-year-old, that was all I wanted, and then obviously further along the line, you got free stuff. That's always good.
Yeah.
Or if you didn't have to pay for something, you weren't going to pay full price for it, which is good. And then ultimately, that led to one thing you could say about music. Whichever part of the music industry you're in, even if it's just in retail, it's always good for the other sex,
yes, I was gonna say your
angle.
social status. And just
yeah,
bam,
yeah, it was good. Ladies were not a problem at that time, anyway.
Oh man, you know what?
So it all came as a package, which is great.
Yeah,
the drugs came later though.
Yeah, for me,
but there was a strong smell of weed. I didn't even know what it was. 15-year-old, and I'm like, "What's that smell?" And they just used to laugh at me, and I'm like, "Okay."
Now that you mentioned like new releases, one of the differences when we were growing up is that the album was so important, right?
Yeah.
The concept of the album and having all those tracks and having a complete package was so important, and it's something that we're missing today. When you started first working here, do you remember listening to like an album that really just stood out to you, like you were working and all of a sudden, bam, you heard something different?
I can. Did you? Quick question for you though. As a child, when you had a cassette deck and you could tape things. Did you ever take an album and readjust the track listing? Ever?
Yes.
I used to do that all the time.
Yeah, and because instead of just skipping over, I want to listen to. Usually, the first track, it wasn't it. Usually, it was number 2 or number 3 was the hit, and then I would go to 5, and then usually it was 8 or 9, and then I would rearrange them. And there was very few albums that I could just leave alone.
But how dumb were we? Because now you look back on it, right? And I got albums now that's taken me years to get back into the right order, right? Because I've been used to hearing it a certain way. And now I can hear exactly why it was in that order in the first place. It just rolled and it makes sense. That band probably spent a year putting those tracks in that order. And we just went along and went, we'll put that number 1, we'll put that number 3, we'll put, it's funny, it's only with experience and knowledge that you get it.
That's the other thing, you're saying the time it took to mix. That's something that doesn't happen now. You have one song, these guys throw it out there, forget about the album.
It's a lot easier, isn't it? I mean, it's a lot easier, bands can self-publish. They've got many different routes to go down. When we were young, or really right up to the 2000s, you had to go through a record label. That's how you did it. Then we had indie record labels that made it slightly easier. And that's the kind of era that I grew up in, you know, to my late teens and 20s. But you just couldn't go on YouTube and put an album out and hit 1 million clicks and become famous. So even though I know what you're saying, that it's easier to just throw stuff out, I kind of like that in a way. I think for quality control, it's not great. But I just think more people listen to new music, the better, really. And it's not controlled by a...
Yeah,
it has more control. It's not controlled by a 70-year-old in a boardroom anymore, which is great, I think.
Yes. You know, now that you say that, there was an observation from Frank Zappa, out of all people.
Yeah.
And he said this, and he was talking about, there was a point in time where, you know, music labels were just getting a particular kind of artist. You know, they called it corporate rock. I don't know if you remember that era.
Yeah.
Okay, so what he said at that point, he said, you know what, we were better off when the old men were running the show, because they didn't know anything, right? They would just say, put it on, let's see if it sells. You know, they were giving everybody an opportunity. And the age of corporate rock was really when, the way he described it is, the hippies got into the record business, right? And they knew what was going to sell. So it was a lot more constrained, and he found it more difficult to put stuff out because they wouldn't approve his stuff the way he wanted to write it.
Yeah. But going back to your question about an album, I was very much a singles kid growing up.
45s?
You know, yeah, 45s. Well, 45s to begin with, and then in the 80s you go into 12-inch singles, which is a different kettle of fish entirely. But I mean, the age I was growing up with people like the Buzzcocks and the Undertones, you know, these were 2.5 minute to 3 minute singles. Post-punk era. Bosh, there you go. Any track that was over 3 minutes, I got bored with. Right? I got so used to a 3 minute track, you know, the Damned, people like that. So albums took me a while to get into, really. And it probably was only starting to work in a music store that I actually properly started listening to albums, funnily enough. And the one that sticks out for me when the first year, I think it was one of the first years, was now, you know, I like New Order a lot, which is a Manchester band, and it was their album Power, Corruption and Lies, which came out at the same time that Blue Monday.
Yes.
Which
that's such a big hit over here. But
literally 99.9% of anybody who's ever heard of New Order have only ever heard of them because of Blue Monday. And what I absolutely loved was they refused to put that single on the album. It wasn't on the album. So people were coming in going, I want the album with Blue Monday on it, please. There isn't one. And people would get so annoyed with you. Of course it's on an album. It's like a massive single. Yes, I realize it's on a massive single, but you can't, they didn't put it on the album. Well, why didn't they put it on the album? I don't know. But it was a punk ethos. They didn't want people to pay for it twice.
Yeah.
And then I think towards the end of its life, they put it on the cassette, but it wasn't on a vinyl album at all for about 15 years. And that was like, wow, that is a statement. You know, you've got a massive, I mean, it became the biggest 12-inch single of all time in the world, and you refused to put it on your album. And that intrigued me. I thought, wow, what are these guys like? I put the album on, and I'd heard some stuff. I'd obviously heard Blue Monday, and I'd heard a couple of other singles, but that totally blew me away because it was just such a fusion of electronic, which I was then into, and guitars, which I'd been previously into. And it just married them together so perfectly, and it totally blew me away. Totally blew me away.
You know, we talked about this previously. You know, we talked about New Order. We talked about Depeche Mode.
Yeah.
And you told me how, you know, there was two. If you listen to Depeche Mode, or you know, you had to be either or where you were growing up. Yeah. The way we experienced it in Hispanic Southern California, if you will.
Yeah.
We were doing this thing where we really didn't want to, we wanted to make a statement that we were not at all into gangs or into gang life or anything like that, because that was really like our uncles, you know, that was the previous generation. Yeah. And we grew up in a generation right after Ronald Reagan, of all people.
Yeah, I remember him.
gave illegal immigrants amnesty, right? He
Right.
legalized everybody. So
Right.
everybody all of a sudden had jobs and had money, right? So we weren't exactly like the previous generation because our parents were working a lot and they had decent jobs and the economy was strong and this and that and the other. So we would, and I don't know if you're familiar with GQ magazine. So, and you know, the way Duran Duran dressed and stuff like that, we were going for that look. So we were like completely alien to everything that was out there. And the music that we chose to listen to was New Order, you know, was Depeche Mode, just very separate than was before. But, you know, we loved it. We loved it. But it was really at that point for us, because I know there's like a year and a half difference between at that point when it was released over there and over here.
Yeah.
But at that point, it was really about fashion. It was about, you know, being at the dance clubs and pumping as much snow into yourself as much as you could.
Yeah.
That was the way we experienced that.
Yeah. Well, you see, for me, Duran Duran, although it was radical for you guys, it was kind of the norm in England, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was the New Romantics, as they were called, you know, guys wearing eyeliner and, you know, white collars and right, you know, showing their feminine sides and everything. Boy George, you know, that was the thing. Fashion, that was the thing. So I went kind of in your direction, but that to us that was the norm. So bands like New Order and Depeche Mode and people like that, they were all anti that. They weren't into fashion, right? They didn't have a look, right? They didn't do things normally, right? They didn't put singles on albums, or they didn't do this, they didn't do the other. But as I said to you before, really, Depeche Mode was sort of seen as sort of hip London, you know? They were from Basildon, which is Essex, but, you know, you wouldn't know what the difference was. It's close to London. Whereas Manchester, I'd never been to at that point. And it could have been another world. It could have been another country. And to me, the difference between the two was one was really poppy, quite bright at the time. I mean, they changed and evolved, and New Order were just like mysterious, dark, almost depressing a little bit. I mean, they came out of Joy Division, right? Yeah. So of course they were, right? So I was much more into that kind of side of things. Depeche Mode at the time for me was a bit too poppy, but I mean, obviously I'm going to love them over the years, but you know.
Well, let me ask you. Everybody has a music genre they just can't listen to for whatever reason. For me, it's not old country music. It's the newer country music that I don't like here in the U.S. What is yours? What is it that you just have to take off the radio as soon as you hear it?
I don't know if there's a particular genre. I mean, classical is just is a minefield. Okay. It's just obviously because it's classical. There's just so much of it. And I like classical. I wouldn't automatically turn it off, but I don't ever really go to classical as probably as much as I should do. So I don't hate it. I'm not as into it as other forms of genres of music. The only one I would really say is I'm very particular about metal bands. I do like metal bands, but you know, I'm AC/DC. If you consider them a metal band, I do. And certainly when I was growing up, Anthrax, Slayer, people like that. But as it's evolved, I've sort of dropped out of metal music. To be honest, it doesn't do anything for me anymore. That's just for me.
Yeah,
but I have a lot of friends who are into metal and have not deviated at all. So
yeah, you know what? Me too. There's a gentleman at work. He's always listening to heavy metal, but he's a mild mannered, and I'm talking about like metal. He's mild mannered, just very docile in his manner or whatever. But whenever he's listening to music, that's exactly what he's listening to.
I have a friend. I've known him for 30 odd years. Met him working in music retail. And his nickname, nobody knows his real name. I know his real name. his friends know his real name, but he's known everywhere as Mosh, as in Mosh Pit. And he's covered in tattoos, piercings, He's a skinhead,
Huh.
but he is the gentlest man you've ever met in your life. He is a sweetie. You could put him in a club or in a gig and a metal band's on, and he just transformed into this absolute wild animal beast. It's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, when we were growing up, and I'm talking about the early 80s, okay? We knew that we were behind Europe musically, right? So it was just a matter of fact. We took it as a matter of fact that, you know, if you want to get something new,
Yeah.
musically, you would have to look to England and to Europe, but mostly England, right? Because when it came to producing videos, you guys started earlier than we did. Like, you guys had a lot more videos than we did. And
Well, you kind of say that, but
Mhm.
if you go back to the 60s, people like the Beach Boys, they were producing kind of movie shorts. I mean, they weren't videos. They didn't get played
Yeah.
on TV very much, but they would have been. I don't know what it was like over there, but I mean, I can think of plenty of times, you know, back in the old days of cinema, when you'd have a main feature and you'd have a secondary feature. Yeah, this is going back a
Yes.
bit.
Yeah.
And a lot of the times, these secondary features would be bands, and a lot of them sometimes would just be these music clips. I mean, the Beatles did music videos in a sense for Strawberry Fields, all sorts of singles.
Yes.
So it's always been there. And I know what you're going to allude to about why it blew up, right? But it has always been there. It was just waiting for the catalyst for music video. Didn't come from us; it came from you.
Yeah, but you know, I remember MTV execs talking, you know, and this is, you know, I want to say 5-10 years ago, talking about why they had so many videos from Europe. And the reason was that they just, in Europe, and you can tell me whether it's true or not, but what they were saying is they were already shipping promotional videos around themselves there, where they didn't have to do that here in the US. And that's why we got exposed to music that we never would have gotten exposed to. And when MTV really blew up here, I mean, it started in 81, but for us, it really wasn't spread out wide until really like 1982. Like, that's really when it became prevalent. When were you aware of MTV?
I'm laughing. I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing at the memory.
Yeah.
My best friend was kind of rich, okay, and I went around his house. He said, "You got to come round. We've got this new thing at the house." And I said, "Okay." I went round, and there's this massive satellite dish in their garden, right? That, like a remote control, that you could move it around to follow the satellites, right?
Yes.
I'd never seen anything like that. I was into space, so I saw this and thought, "Wow, what the hell is this?" Now, we used it for that very reason, okay? We were kind of in a band together and stuff like that. It didn't go anywhere. Don't worry about it. We won't go down that avenue. But we watched MTV.
Okay.
His father, who was recently divorced, he used it for porn. Because a lot of European porn sites had already gone, you know, so you could pick these things up via a satellite.
Yeah.
So it's like anything. Porn drives any industry, doesn't it? It drove the DVD, it drove video, it drove the internet, and it drove satellite TV. So I'm not saying we never used it for that reason, because we were like young, so we did. But right, I got into that quite early. But it's funny you should say about the videos being used, because every big or small record label would send you out almost quarterly a video for the store that would have their band's videos on it, and you would put them on in the store.
Yes.
So it was an audio-visual thing. So it was important. It was important to drive the music through video, definitely.
Yeah, before MTV, we had like a couple of shows, you know, that were usually, you know, on cable, you know, odd hours, where, you know, they would put on music videos, right?
Yeah.
But when MTV came out, and everybody wanted to get cable for that reason, it was like a frenzy. Like you need to have cable, and MTV was the only reason to get cable. Before that, we didn't care about, HBO, Cinemax at the time. Showtime was still around, and we didn't care about that. We wanted MTV, and pretty much to all of us, MTV replaced the radio in our house, because we would watch these videos. As soon as we got home from school, they'd be in the background while we were doing homework. Before that, we would watch it at the mall or something like that, because it was only available, through, satellite and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I don't think, let me tell you something. I don't think the influence probably could be quantified on how it inspired different bands, because over here in Southern California, basically, there was very few outlets where you could hear different kinds of music. I mean, like you couldn't hear the Human League in their early stages, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there was stuff like Rick Springfield and the Cars and stuff like that, pop stuff, right? But you would have never heard of Men at Work, right? It was so visual,
right?
They
were massive over here. They were massive over here.
Yeah, I mean, Generation X with Billy Idol. I mean, you're getting exposed to things that typically you would never see. But there was a lot.
We're really lucky over here. Very lucky. I mean, I don't think most people kind of appreciate how lucky we are over here. So I've already said, Mark Bolan, he was quite a big pop star at the time, had his own kids TV show, putting live bands on, and that was a thing. You often saw bands in children's programs a lot when I was growing up, right?
Yes.
Mainly pop artists, but you did see some quite kind of bizarre bits and pieces around the kind of, edge of pop. Plus, we also had public broadcast radio. So you could listen to all sorts of different music. I mean, a shout out to a YouTuber now. I hope he's watching. Now, subscribe if you like music and you like 80s music, but you don't necessarily want to have pop 80s. You want to have kind of around the edge 80s.
Yes.
This guy called Born George Mixtapes. Okay, that's his handle on. And he gets a lot of stuff on there because he used to listen to a guy called John Peel. Okay. John Peel was on Radio 1, which is the main broadcast, but he was on late at night. All the pop stuff was out of the way for the day. And he played, real left way out there music.
Yes.
That was the presumption it was. It wasn't to me. That was the music I wanted to listen to. And he had that radio show, and he did it for 25, 30 years.
Wow.
So he was so influential. He was massively influential. So I was lucky. I could tune into the main radio station during the day and hear pop stuff. And then I could tune in later on and I could hear the most bizarre things and the most up-to-date, the most hitting things that were as far away from pop music as you could possibly get. He was an institution, and I know that channel is pretty much dedicated to a lot of the music he used to play. So we were lucky. Yeah.
Awesome. I mean,
so MTV to me didn't make such massive difference because we already kind of had that ingrained. We could go places to get music. We could find places on radio but we could go places. It wasn't limited in that way,
Yeah. I mean, for example, I'll give you an example. Remember Yazoo or Yaz?
Two different things. Yaz and Yazoo are two different things. Yaz is a female artist. Yazoo is Alison Moyet.
So either one you couldn't find, readily. Like you weren't going to find them being played even at the pop station at midnight.
Right.
Right. But you could see them on MTV.
That would have been. That would have totally been considered pop over there. Top 40 pop.
Yeah. And it's something that we never saw over here. I could tell you bands that made an impression or people, or just singers. Adam Ant was one of them. Like, we've never seen shit like this. We're like, what?
No.
And
have you ever heard any early Adam Ant? Or
yes. Yes, but
when I say early, like the 70s Adamant before the 80s, and
no,
the whole pirate thing.
Well, when I saw him, he was already wearing the pirate suits. That's what we got over here.
He was massively influential in the punk scene. Massively. He probably produced one of the best punk albums of all time called Dirt Wears White Socks. It's different from what he went on to do, but it had that same passion, it had that same energy. So he was kind of known before he hit over here amongst people who knew. But yeah, I can imagine it being quite a culture shock to see Adamant on your screen.
Yeah, but and we loved it.
Yeah,
because we've never seen anything like this. I mean, this is the time where everything was so pop, right?
Yeah.
We had Rick James, stuff like that, and he was great. But if you're looking for something different, that's where we started getting just a different way of seeing it. It became very influential in the Hispanic community, especially alternative British music.
I know. We've talked
very
about
popular
this.
here. Yeah, very popular.
Which blows my mind. Like I said to you, I mean, I knew Morrissey had a bit of a cult following with you guys, but I didn't realize sort of British alternative music was as important to your community as it was to mine.
Yeah,
which is quite mind blowing to me. It still is.
I really, if it was up to me, I would like to do a show of every year. Let's do, 1980, 1981, and
oh, yeah, we can do that if you want.
Oh, absolutely. I'd love to have these conversations, like every Sunday, because, sometimes you just want to hear something where, two people are talking, they're having a good conversation.
Yeah.
And you're just kind of listening in. When I was a kid, I would listen into the conversations of adults, and I would just sit there and listen. And sometimes on the internet, you can't do that because you gotta, somebody sent the super chat, and it sends a conversation a completely different way.
Yeah, of course.
You're not carrying the same light. Let me ask you, when we were growing up, and at the point, let's say in 1982, 1983, I don't think in our wildest dreams we thought that record stores would be closing. Even when it came to the CDs, when the CDs came out, I didn't think record stores would be closing.
Yeah.
But to put it in perspective for everybody out there, right? When Tower Records in the LA Strip, a place where bands used to go and play and perform.
Yeah.
Right? In 1999, Tower Records did about close to $1 billion or something like that. And within 4 years, they were bankrupt.
Yeah.
It was such a gigantic shift for our generation, right? What do you remember about that time?
Well, when I got into working in music stores, it was just a massive boom. I mean, it was just, they were everywhere. Little independent stores. There wasn't really anybody taking massively control in a big corporate way.
Mm-hmm.
Virgin were about, H&B were about. I when I got out of that little record store, I say little, it was quite a big store, but that indie store, I went to work for a company called Our Price Music. It's only Britain only, so you would never have heard of them. Mm-hmm. They eventually got bought out by Virgin, but at one point, that's that company that I work for. We had, in the town that I worked in, we had 4 different stores. 4, right? In one town. Okay. And that's not including everybody else, like the little indies. H&B had a store. Everybody like that had a store. And it was just booming. It was just silly. People would consume everything physically. They didn't have any other way of consuming it. And obviously over time, it got slowly kind of watered down. As soon as MP3 players became available, iPods became available. I think when I first looked at an iPod, I thought, here we go. It's over, right? It was so beautiful. Okay. Yeah. And the promises were like, well, you can hold this amount. I went, how many songs can you hold on it? How many? I'd seen MP3 players before. They were clunky and horrible, but this was just beautiful. And it was like,
okay. I mean, we had, what did we have? We had Walkmans, we had Discmans eventually, right?
Yeah.
But was it a cell phone that you first grabbed as an MP3 player?
No, I had
the iPod.
No, I had a bare basic MP3 until the iPod came along, and I saw it, fell in love, had some stuff discount available, bought one almost immediately. And I kind of knew that it was just a matter of time, really.
Because you were selling them there at the store?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So that really came back to bite us on the arse a little bit. And obviously companies tried to adapt as best they could. Mm-hmm. So, for example, we had an MP3 download site when I was at Virgin, etc., and all sorts of ways of trying to get around it, and we adapted our stores and what have you. But the gig was up at that point, really. I mean, funny you should say Tower Music, because we had some Tower Music stores in the UK. One in Piccadilly Circus, which was quite well known. And Virgin bought Tower Records in the UK.
Wow. Yeah,
and even I had to go in there and help kind of refit it and try and Virginize it, and I just didn't want to do it because it was Tower. You know, it was like, let's not change this. And the staff were like, we don't want you to change this. And it was like, you know, but we have to because we're adapting. You know, Tower went down for a specific reason. We need to adapt to the market. And that was quite depressing, even though it was like, wow, I'm working in the Piccadilly Tower, right? I mean, it's like an ambition. I mean, I worked in the Virgin Megastore in London, which is it's still to this day is the largest ever music store. But there was something about the Tower in Piccadilly. It was just in such a great spot. And I thought then, yeah, it's not going to work, is it? You know, I need to think about getting out. I got out before everything really collapsed, which was about 10 years ago, 11 years ago here in this country. I just thought, look, you know, I've had a blast for 25 years. I've been playing, really. I've not had a job. I've just been playing, right? I've done well out of it. I've got a house out of it. I've had 2 kids, you know, but I've got to get serious with life because this isn't going to last. And it didn't. I left and the company went down about 18 months afterwards, after a really long struggle, which was sad to see because they stopped buying music in and all sorts of things. But yeah. I think when I first saw an iPod,
you know what? And we've only touched the surface, right? We just really talked about when you first started working there and the final days. There's so much in between. I mean, there's so many stories I'm sure you have that I'd love to hear.
Anybody who's worked in doing that for that amount of time can't not have stories. It's impossible not to have stories. It really is.
Of course, you know. I mean, it's like
I'm not unusual. I might be unusual to me, but obviously, I've got a big group of friends that I still have from those days, and you could drag any of them into here and probably have a similar conversation with them. We just think we're normal, right? And I have friends. And you think I've got a good? I mean, I have got people who give them a record from the 80s, and they'll tell you what the record label was, the catalog number, you know, who mixed, who produced. That they're insane. They're not normal people. Mine isn't quite as good as that, unfortunately. But
you know, and those records were so important to us, right? Not only the music, but the physical media, right? We were looking at it, and it's still to this day brings memories.
For us, it was about bringing the music. I know this sounds a bit, I don't know, stuck up, but for us, it was about bringing the music to you, to the public. Because if it wasn't for us, you're not going to get your hands on it. Okay, so we, you know, the big part for us is not selling hundreds of this or thousands of that. It was maybe selling 10 of an album that nobody'd ever heard of before, right? And those 10 people went away, and that started off a little journey for them, right? Because they would listen to that. Oh, I've never heard of this. You know, what other bands are like this, etc.
I bet recommending somebody a record and then coming back the next week or whatever.
It's an amazing
feeling. I need more of this, you know. And so many things. The one thing that really goes unsaid is that we are so lucky that we were born in this particular generation, because we got to see the beginnings of punk, right? We got to see you know, the music video revolution. We got to see so many things in their early stages, and we can appreciate it now, and especially with technology. I'm telling you, this has to be a series. It can't be just this one show.
I'm down for it.
Awesome.
I mean, like, if you got any more questions, that's what I mean. I think you did say you wanted to focus on 1981 when we had a DM. So I got a list of things that I was listening to in 1981. But if you've got any other questions, go ahead.
No, I want to go straight to the music.
Straight to the music. Okay. Well, I think for me, 1981. It's just really weird. You said 1981 to me. It was like, right, can we just focus on 1981? And I'm like, okay. I don't know why you want to focus on 1981. And I'm great with music. But I'm absolutely rubbish at dates. Timelines are not my thing. Okay. So I'm thinking, what the hell came out in 1981? Right? And I had to go back and have a look.
Yes. I mean,
because my memory's not that good.
I can tell you, for example, what the number one hit was that year. Some song that, even though I love this lady, right? It's just really just pop music. It was Physical by Olivia Newton-John. That's what was going on. I love rock and roll.
Yeah.
I love rock and roll. Eye of the Tiger was coming out there.
Yeah, they were all big over here. Yeah.
Jack and Diane, right? Yeah. But those, those for us were like the top 40 bands, but sprinkled within that, right? Sprinkled within that first generation of MTV music. You had sometimes they would put on, whether it was on MTV or the other music shows that started popping out because of the popularity of MTV. Some of the stations would start playing music videos later in the evening, and I remember listening to Peter Gabriel for the first time.
Yeah,
it was something that I've never heard before.
Yeah,
one thing that stood out to me that they put on cable was, I think it was called the Secret Policeman's Other Ball.
Yeah,
right. And
a comedy show. Yeah.
Yes, and I remember Sting doing a solo version of Message in a Bottle.
Right.
And like that performance, just like, wow, who is this guy?
Yeah.
I didn't know he could do stuff solo.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, those are the things that started to influence people here. Of course, you had the Flock of Seagulls, things like that, but
never that big over here. I know they were massive in America. They were never big over here. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
weird.
A lot of people, when they think of walking into the arcade, right? Arcades, all the arcades had arcades and they had MTV playing in the background at the same time. That was pretty much a standard everywhere.
Yeah.
And when I think about walking into the arcade with money, right, after I got paid from selling donuts and cookies and whatever the hell I was making, that song was playing in there and I was ready to spend some quarters.
Well, this is why games and music and technology for me are kind of, they just intertwine so much. If I run through just some of the stuff that I was listening to in 1981, it was the age of what I thought was new technology. 1981 seemed to be the future to me.
Yes.
It's the first year I got a home computer, for example. Okay. And I mean, we might as well go straight to it. The best album of 1981, probably in my top 3 of all time, was an album by Kraftwerk, which are a German electronic band. I don't know if you heard them.
No, I never heard them.
Never heard of Kraftwerk, man. You are going to open yourself to such wonders. Okay. They were from Dusseldorf in Germany. I think it was Dusseldorf. I'm pretty certain it was. They had a hit single called Das Model, or the Model, because they re-recorded it in English. And in 1981 it got to number 1, and you heard it everywhere. It was so catchy, electronic, and I didn't realize at the time that it had been recorded a few years ago, and was re-released in 1981. But they had an album that year, and it wasn't on that album. And again, it's one of those things, isn't it? They had a massive hit, and their new album didn't contain that song. But that album, it was called Computer World. Okay,
Mhm.
and I was just getting into computers, and computers weren't a massive thing. Arcades were a massive thing. Home consoles, yeah, they're off the ground, they're running. ColecoVision, Intellivision, 2600. But home computers were still not to hit big in the UK, and boy did they hit big. Boy did they hit big. We kind of missed out we didn't miss out. We chose to miss out on the NES era, really,
Yeah.
because we were into home computers. And this was called home computer. And if you go back and look at it now, there's a song on it called Computer Love,
Yes.
which is essentially about internet dating.
Yes.
In 1981, we didn't even have the internet in 1981.
Yeah. So
why is somebody writing about internet dating in 1981? They were writing about the future. They had another track called Computer World, which is about protecting your security from online, from the government, from the FBI. It was like, if you're not careful, you're going to lose your individuality, and people are going to know, your secrets and what have you.
That was just prophecy, wasn't it? I mean,
the whole album is 100% prophecy, right? It's just mad to think about it.
Let me tell you what stood out to us, right? So, for example, Computer Love is something that you could readily hear on the radio everywhere at all times.
Zap.
But
No.
But if you wanted to listen to something completely different, I can tell you some eye openers for us.
Yeah.
Susie and the Banshees.
Yeah.
Right. It influenced her fashion, influenced so many Hispanic teenagers' dress.
She is on my list of 1981 albums. Juju, it was called. Okay.
Yeah.
But these guys weren't. I've got to finish my point. My love for Kraftwerk is never ending. So they foresee the future, but they had a track called Numbers. And the one thing I'd like you to do remember now, it's 1981. Synthesizers were barely, they were in their infancy. They started making electronic albums in 1976. When punk was hitting, they were making their first album called Autobahn, which is like a concept album of, this is what going down a motorway sounds like, an Autobahn. That's what it is in German. But it's with electronic music, right? Just listen to Numbers. Okay, it's got a track called Numbers. There's no vocals in it apart from synthesized vocals. Okay, They practically invented electro and hip hop music on that track. I'm not even joking. Right? DM me afterwards you've heard it and tell me something different.
Well,
2 years later than that, they made another single called Tour de France that kids in New York and all around the world used to breakdance to pop to.
Yes.
The poor guys from Dusseldorf. It's mad. Planet Rock by Africa Bombata.
Yes.
That completely uses one of it samples one of their tracks. The first couple of Bombata singles and all that early electro, 100% was Kraftwerk. And they were making their own instruments. It was just the future. And that's what 1981's meant to me. It was like, wow, this is the future. And I like it,
Yeah.
The only image that they had was they pretended to be robots, pretty much. They wear red shirts, black ties, and they put makeup on to make themselves look like robots. And nothing you've ever seen. And if anybody hasn't listened to Kraftwerk, listen to Kraftwerk, go onto the internet, listen to Numbers, 1981, and tell me they didn't invent electro and hip hop. You're wrong. But no, I love all bands like that. But to me that year, that's what it meant. There was a single called, after the model came out, there was another, I think they were Austrian. They were called Trio, and they just had a single called Da Da Da.
Yeah.
Did you ever hear that?
Yes, I remember that song.
And it was made with pretty much a $50 Casio keyboard. But they just put the presets in for the drums. And they just used that, and then the lyrics went on top of that. And that was almost, to me, my punk, because I missed the beginnings of punk. But then I heard a track that it was definitely top 10. It might have been top 5. It was a hit. and I could go into a store and buy that keyboard for $50 or 50 quid or whatever it was over here.
Uh-huh.
And I just thought, well, I can do that. And that's where bands like, honestly, that's where bands like Depeche Mode, New Order using synthesizers, Yazoo, that's where they all came from. They all came from that movement. So you think it's English, but it isn't really. It's German. That's where it comes out of.
Yeah, that's why I said Europe, because not all the artists were from England, but some of them, even the ones that spoke English, they learned British English, right? So we thought,
yeah,
well, maybe they're from Britain, maybe they're from a part of Britain we don't know. Information wasn't as readily available as it is today, but things that made an impact, like I told you, with Susie and the Banshees, Kate Bush, right, was something that you couldn't hear. This country's so big at that point, right? And people have to remember, this is before the internet, so there is no internet.
No, exactly.
Right? You could just have to word of mouth, or you go to the record store. People write articles, in music magazines. Remember those existed?
Well, right? I was going to say, did you used to have things called fanzines, where kind of so wherever you grew up in, whatever town you grew up in, you'd have a group of people who would just make a magazine about music, and they would all put the articles in it themselves. And they would sell it. They would sell it on street corners. You didn't have the internet to sell it to. They just go out at gigs and say, "Do you want to buy the fanzine?" and what have you. And I wrote articles. I went to gigs and I wrote articles for fanzines. But that was our internet. You go to a gig and look for fanzines. And think, okay, I'll take that from you. I'll take that from you. And you'd read it and go, well, that sounds great. I'm going to go to that concert next time I can do it. That was our internet, fanzines. It was amazing.
Yeah, I mean, for us. I can only tell you the experience of the 80s in East Los Angeles, right?
Yeah.
As you can imagine, in a Hispanic neighborhood, you're not going to have a lot of that. A lot of the fanzines you would only see if you were going to the Valley, if you're going to Santa Monica, because you had to have the resources in order to do that. Yeah. Right? We barely had enough to take the bus to school and our lunch, so the disposable income wasn't there.
Yeah, but the thing about these fanzines, they were about, I don't know, 5 cents, 10 cents. Sort of 10p over here. Nobody did it for profit. They just purely produced these handmade, hand-printed magazines just because we wanted to talk about and share our musical tastes. Nobody made any money out of it.
Yeah, the only ones that were in our area, believe it or not, were mostly had to do with anime. That kind of stuff. Okay. Because you have to have the resources for printing, for example, right? And most of the internet, most of the neighborhoods that we lived in, at least, I'm just talking about my experience, right? In the small neighborhood that I live in, there wasn't a lot of that. You're just kind of like trying not to get beat up on your way to school type neighborhood, So we would experience it later on as teenagers. That's when I started seeing more of the fanzine stuff like that. But if you really wanted experience, you had to buy the magazines,
We had great magazines. We had great magazines. We had a great musical press. We had 3 weekly music papers. They were magazines. They were like newspapers, but they were driven by the fanzines. And the fanzines only started because during punk, again, going back, there's no internet. But punk bands were being stopped from playing by the local council because, it's punk. They don't want it in their town. Mm-hmm. So for a movement like that to progress, you have to go underground. So when I say these are printed magazines, they were very amateur, but the quality of the writing, a lot of people went on to write for the big music magazines that came out of that period, that scene, as it were. So it was kind of underground that went overground eventually.
Oh man, that is awesome. Yeah. You know what? We have to do another hour of this. An hour has gone by.
I know we've got an hour in the quarter. We're not even barely touched anything, have we?
Yeah. We're barely scratching the surface. We haven't gotten into any of the actual stories of your experience at the store, or we barely grazed over 1981. We really haven't gotten deep into.
Well, I haven't even told you my favorite albums. I'm going to tell them before we go. 2 seconds. Favorite singles. Favorite single of 1981 was "Soft Cell Tainted Love."
Oh, Man, that was yeah.
Right. The 12-inch single of that is my favorite 12-inch single of all time. Because it mixes, and this didn't happen beforehand. This mixes Tainted Love. It's about 8 or 9 minute track, and then
Where
it
Did Our
goes
Love
into
Go?
Where Do You Love? Exactly,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
Which was for me. My mum loved that kind of stuff. I'm loving this kind of stuff. There was very few records I could put on, and my mum would go, "I like that," right? And I took it back and went, "Well, just listen to it. Listen to all of it." And we kind of found somewhere to go musically, which we couldn't do all the time. So that was great. So Tainted Love was I said Kraftwerk, Computer World, but I mean, everything that came out of it pretty much was dominated. Heaven 17, Penthouse and Pavements.
Oh, Heaven 17. Oh
Yeah.
my God. When we didn't get it when you got it, right? We got it like a year after. But it was when we heard Heaven 17, it was just a different monster. We had to start consuming. What is this? Where can we get it? Because at that point,
Heaven 17, I don't know if you're aware, they came out of Human League. So there were 3 people in the Human League. There were 2 of the guys from Heaven 17, Will Oakey, the lead singer, and they split from the Human League. And
because Human League had
Heaven 17.
Yeah, Human League had "Don't You Want Me, Baby." I mean,
that was the biggest selling single of that year.
Yeah.
So I've got that as number 2, Dare by Human League. OMD, Architecture and Morality. It's another electronic-based album. Simple Minds, it might surprise you. An album called Suns and Fascination. Simple Minds started off really quite electronic-y. If you listen again, go back to something called I Travel. Listen to the 12-inch of that. That's Kraftwerk, basically. Cure, Faith. That was a great album. Juju by Susie and the Banshees. And another band from the 80s that I want to shout out that don't get the credit they deserve. That's a band called Killing Joke.
That
I still love to this day. They're still going. They've been through many different lineups, but they're actually back with their original lineup. I mean, this is like 40 years on. They still absolutely kill it. They started up as sort of punk and what have you. It's moved into more metal territory, but they had a great album that year, and they were so influential. Again, somebody you've never probably heard of. Metallica have covered them. All sorts of people, Tool, Ministry, people like that were really heavily influenced by people like that. So
here's a song for you. Maybe remember. What about the Tom Tom Club, "Genius of Love"?
Brilliant album. That's an album from 1981 as well.
Yeah.
I looked at that and thought, shall I? Because Talking Heads, Tom Tom Club, amazing. I think that was the year that you've actually changed my mind on my number 1 single now from some soft sale. It was probably Talking Heads. I mean, because that came on, and the video for
Once in a Lifetime.
The video for that blew my absolute mind.
Yeah,
that whole song, it got to number 1. I'm so proud of the UK for getting that to the number 1 and staying there for weeks and weeks and weeks. The band never came over they didn't support the single over here, which is another reason why I like bands like that. They were like, yeah, number 1 single, who cares? We're not going to come over to mime on some TV show, put our video on, right?
Yeah.
And that was probably the first time a video has really struck home with me, because that's just an amazing song, an amazing album, an amazing video. So thank you for changing my mind. I have changed my mind now.
Yeah, I mean, look,
poor soft sale.
There's a lot of songs that they're special in a nostalgic way, right? Because we enjoyed them, whether it was Tommy Two Tone, that 867-5309, or people were listening to Styx, but there was just music that came over that was so new and so different than that we were listening to, whether it was Madness or Susie and the Banshees, and even Prince coming out, because he was completely different, right? He was completely different than Rick James, just like, and it was just an explosion.
You could hear Rick James in there. You could hear Rick James.
Oh, they hated each other. They hated each other.
I've never been a massive Prince fan. I'll tell you now, and people swear at me, spit at me for saying this. I haven't got anything against Prince. It's just I never clicked with Prince. But
Yeah,
it's interesting
no.
you say Madness. So again, it's one of those bands that's very UK centric. We haven't even touched on that. We went to 1981, right? 1976 to 1980, right? It was a completely different era in my musical taste. We're talking ska, we're talking reggae, we're talking. I mean, I lived in a community with 30% Caribbean, probably 10%, Asian, and the rest being like
when
white
I get
British.
together with my sisters and we play our house, it's like we can't listen to it without getting.
But it was amazing, that whole ska. It was ska episode of punk or post punk. You had them. You had people like the Specials, when they were just irking back to music that they grew up with in the 60s, because the ska movement was reggae based. And it's amazing to think we had that whole movement after punk of just white guys who had listened to black music and wanted to replicate it for a white audience,
Yeah,
that's a different topic.
Yeah, you know what? And we haven't even touched another band that came out here, and we're just like, what? It was what was it? General Public. Am I missing the name of the band? I think it was called.
Hill, you mean?
It was the English Beat. Right?
Oh, the English Beat. Yeah,
the English Beat.
Yeah,
and then it became General Public, I think.
Yeah,
but yeah, oh my gosh, yeah. See, I mean, this is what I'm talking about. That's one episode isn't enough. There's just
you need to
too
pick.
much.
Not only do you need to pick a year, you might need to pick a genre. you might have to go specific to say 1982 ska or whatever.
Yeah. We're gonna start at 1980.
We can't go backwards, can we?
Yeah.
We need to go forward. Because the one thing about music is it goes forward, and we should never forget that. It goes forward. Sometimes it chugs, right? Sometimes it chugs. You can't have a revolution every generation. I don't think that's possible, right? But and we lived through things like punk, hip hop, lots of things like that were just revolutionary. It's harder to do that now. And I feel sorry for young bands. It's harder to do it because I'll listen to a young band and they go, "Well, these guys are young and new and fresh," and I'm going, "They've just been listening to The Cure, or they've just been listening to, whatever." So they haven't pushed it forward per se, but it doesn't mean it's bad music.
Yeah, and the other thing is we're talking about these experiences in two different parts of the world.
Yeah,
where we, sometimes you can experience the same music in two different ways, like we did, for example, New Order and
totally.
And these are just little snapshots, right? And I'm glad we're having these conversations instead of just having the crap that's going on there now, because sometimes you just want to have a sit down, good conversation with somebody about things that just nurture the soul, and that's what music does. Brings people together, and it does nurture our soul. I want to thank you. Yeah, I really want to thank you for coming on and just sharing your experience with us. And we got to do this again.
Well, you might want to look at the view count before you decide that, though.
Oh, I don't. You know what? I don't care. I don't give a shit about the views. I don't. I mean, it's if I could be.
Well, I'd be in Leo DS. I am now officially the longest interview. Woohoo!
Thank you so much.
I'm going for the lowest views and the longest interview. Great.
Oh, you know what? We got to do this every Sunday or whenever you can.
I'm happy to do it, man.
Door open for you.
I can talk for England, and if you want to talk about music or video games or cinema, I am passionate about all three. But I'm more than happy to keep it to music. I've got.
Yeah, well, we got 40. Once we finish the 40 years of music, we'll tackle something else.
That's fair enough. Yeah, you hit me up at just DM me, and we'll sort something out for next week.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for joining me.
No problem. I apologize to your listeners and your viewers for boring them to death, but I hope there's one or two out there that enjoyed it.
If we made somebody's day, that's all that really counts.
Well, you made my day, so that's all that counts.
Thank you, sir. You have a great evening.
And you have a great time. Right. Goodbye, everybody. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
New videos every Monday and Sunday. Thank you for joining me on another episode of the Gen X Gamer. Remember to like and subscribe, click that notification bell, and remember, never ever be afraid to be happy. I'll catch you on the next one. Take care.